It didn't begin with shouting. There were no headlines, no slurs, no cameras rolling. Just a quiet cafe, the hum of a coffee machine, and a soft voice on the phone saying, "I love you," in a language not everyone understood. That was all it took. 30 seconds, one sentence, and suddenly, everything she'd built every early morning, every small silence swallowed, was gone. But this isn't just a story about being fired. It's about the slow, aching weight of being told you don't belong in a place you've earned. It's about what happens when the world only makes room for part of you and expects you to hide the rest. This is Camille's story. And it might be yours, too. Now, let's get started. It was 2:57 p.m. on a slow Tuesday in uptown Charlotte. The cafe lights at Birch Barley bathed the minimalist oak counters in a soft amber hue. Somewhere between oat milk refills and the low hum of a Bon Iver playlist, Camille Brooks stepped behind the espresso machine to take a call. Her phone had vibrated once, just once. It was her grandmother, calling from a nursing home in Newark, New Jersey. Camille didn't hesitate. She knew her grandmother only called when it was urgenter, when the loneliness got too loud. She whispered, "Hello," and then, "Mo knife frere, Mommy. I love you, Grandma." It was soft, almost a breath, just a moment of warmth in a space designed to feel cold and curated. Camille didn't know that those 5 syllables would upend everything she'd built. At Birch Barley, silence was the default. Uniforms were sleek, minimal, and beige. Smiles were required, earrings discouraged, and personal expression kept under strict control unless it was on brand. Camille had learned early on that in this place, fitting in meant folding in. She had worked here for 3 years, never late, never out of line. She memorized the exact milk temperature the regulars preferred. She knew which seats near the windows caught the best golden hour light for Instagram photos. She restocked without being asked, trained new hires with patience, and handled difficult customers with a grace that wasn't taught. It survived. But none of that mattered after one phone call in a language most people didn't understand. From his usual spot near the back, Jordan Hayes, the general manager, looked up just in time to hear Camille's voice. He couldn't understand what she said, but he stiffened the way people do when something reminds them that they are not the center of everything. It wasn't the words. It was an unfamiliar situation. It was control slipping through his fingers for a split second. Camille hung up after less than 30 seconds. She tucked her phone into her apron, walked out from behind the machine, and went back to work. She cleared table 4, restocked the citrus slices, and offered a to-go bag with her usual quiet poise. She didn't notice the tension in Jordan's jaw as he typed something into his tablet. She didn't see how he avoided eye contact with her for the rest of the day. But Alana did. Alana had worked behind the bar with Camille for over a year. She saw the way Jordan's energy shifted. She saw the way the other servers exchanged glances. There was no shouting, no warning. Just a silent flicker of something cold slipping into the air. By the time Camille clocked out, the shift board for next week had been updated. Her name was missing. She didn't panic. Not yet. Mistakes happened. Maybe they'd forgotten to add her in. Maybe someone else accidentally cleared her line. It wasn't the first time there'd been a scheduling error. So, she walked upstairs to the manager's office, knocked once on the open door and asked, "Hey Jordan, I think my shifts didn't get put in?" He didn't look up right away. Then he said it. "Camille, can we talk for a second?" The moment froze. Something cracked inside her, not a sound, but a silence that pressed on her chest like a weight. She stepped inside. The door closed. The next 6 minutes would feel like an hour. Jordan's words were smooth, practiced. There's been some concern about consistency. Certain behaviors don't align with our brand. Some customers felt uncomfortable. Camille stared at him. It wasn't her tone, not her attitude, not her service. It was her language. The one her grandmother spoke to her in before she could even walk. She didn't argue. She knew that if she raised her voice, It would only confirm whatever fear was already blooming in his mind. So she just asked, calmly, "Are you letting me go because I spoke Yoruba to my grandmother?" He didn't say no. He just said, "This environment requires clarity and predictability." Her chest tightened, but she didn't cry. Not there. Not in front of someone who couldn't even look her in the eye. She nodded once, picked up her things, and left. Outside, the sun was still shining. Pedestrians still walked their dogs. Someone laughed on a scooter nearby. Life went on completely unaffected by the fact that a woman had just lost her job for saying, "I love you," in the language of her bloodline. She sat in her car, hands trembling around the steering wheel. Her apron sat folded on her lap. She took a breath and texted, "Mommy, I lost my job today. I'll call you later. I love you." The street noise faded. The engine stayed off. For the first time in a long while, Camille felt not small, but erased. They didn't yell. They didn't insult her. They just erased her, softly, quietly. That night, Camille couldn't sleep. She stared at the cracks in her ceiling, like they were trying to tell her something. Something she already knew. Something she had spent most of her adult life trying not to feel. She'd done everything right. She'd said yes to every extra shift, smiled through every backhanded compliment, and swallowed the sting of "you're so well-spoken," like it was praise. She'd worked hard. Hard enough to be invisible when necessary, and visible just enough to be useful. And yet none of that had protected her. In the silence of her one-bedroom apartment, the weight settled in. Not the weight of being fired, but the weight of how it had happened. No raised voices, no ugly words. Just phrases like brand alignment and guest discomfort. Words designed to sound neutral, professional, safe. But they weren't safe. They were daggers wrapped in policy. She sat at the kitchen table, a mug of cold chamomile untouched in her hands, thinking of all the small things that had brought her here. Her name wasn't always Camille. She was born Camila Oluwasiun Adebayo in a Newark apartment above a laundromat. Her parents, Nigerian immigrants, spoke Yoruba at homewords that sounded like prayer even when they weren't. But when she was 7, a drunk driver ran a red light and made her an orphan in the span of 6 seconds. She remembered sitting in the back of her aunt's car that night, still in the white dress from church, trying to understand why nobody had come to pick her up. After the funeral, she moved in with her grandmother, Mommy, who never let her forget where she came from. Mommy spoke English only when she had to. The rest of the time, it was Yoruba, and the food, always from home. Egusi soup, jollof rice, puffs rolled by hand. And while other kids at school brought Lunchables and PBJs, Camille brought tuwo and okra, carefully packed in small containers with her name written in Sharpie. She stopped correcting people when they said her name wrong. First it was Ka-mi-la. Then it became Camille. It was easier to be liked, easier to survive. But she never stopped speaking Yoruba at home. It was hers, her safety net, her memory, her truth. And now she was being punished for it. She stood up, restless, and walked over to the window. Outside, a neighbor's porch light flickered. She could hear a dog barking in the distance and the low bass of a car passing by. The world was moving, but she wasn't. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was Alana. "Cam, I just heard. Are you okay?" Camille stared at the screen. She didn't know what to say. So she wrote, "Yeah, just tired. I'll be all right." It was a lie, but it was the kind people told when the truth would cost too much to say out loud. She sat back down and opened her laptop. The homepage is loaded with a quote of the day. "If you want to tell people the truth, make them laugh. Otherwise, they'll kill you." Oscar Wilde. She closed it again. At 9:43 the next morning, she called Ma'ami. The line crackled once before connecting. "Camila," Mommy's voice came through, warm and sweet. "I was waiting for your call." Camille took a breath. "Mommy, they fired me." A pause. "Because of yesterday?" "Yes." Another pause. This one longer. Mommy didn't gasp, didn't scold, just said quietly, "I'm sorry, my child, but remember truth has a long breath. It always outlasts lies." Camille smiled through the burn in her chest. "I didn't even say anything wrong," she whispered. "I know. You only said you love me." That night, Camille stayed off social media. She ignored news, muted group chats, and silenced her inbox. But even in stillness, she could feel the storm beginning to stir. At Birch Barley, things were different. Alana said nothing at first. But as soon as she saw Jordan smiling like nothing had happened, the bitterness crawled up her throat like acid. She slammed 2 cocktail shakers, a little harder than usual. Her hands were shaking when she texted Camille again. "I can't pretend it's fine here. It's like you vanished. And they all act like you were never part of this." Camille didn't reply. She didn't want Alana to feel the same weight. She didn't want her friend to risk her job. So she said the same words Mama used to tell her growing up. Lie low, live loud later. But Alana? She wasn't wired that way. She joined a private Facebook group called Service Workers United Charlotte Chapter and wrote a short, anonymous post. "A black woman I worked with was fired yesterday. She answered a 30-second phone call in Yoruba to check on her grandmother. A guest said it made them uncomfortable. Now she's gone. Just think about that. No names, no restaurant tags, just facts." She didn't expect it to matter. But by the next afternoon, that post had been screenshot, reposted, and shared across Twitter, Reddit, and even Tumblr. And somewhere figured out which cafe served Nigerian cold brew with cardamom foam. By 8:00 p.m., Birch Barley Yelp page had over 200 new reviews. Apparently only English is allowed with your espresso. 9 toast and racism on the side? No thanks. Camille's phone started buzzing again. Friends, co-workers, journalists. But Camille stayed still. Not out of fear. Out of sheer, exhausted grief. She sat on the floor of her kitchen, back against the cabinets, wondering how something so small, so sacred, could have been so threatening. She replayed it in her mind again. The call, the warmth in her voice, the flicker of comfort in Mommy's sign, the soft syllables that felt like home. Was it really that dangerous? Or was it simply that she had dared to be untranslated in a world built to flatten her? She wasn't trying to be brave. She just didn't want to disappear quietly. 3 days passed. Camille hadn't left her apartment. She lived in her oversized hoodie, her favorite ceramic mug never quite full, the blinds drawn just enough to let in light, but not people. She kept the TV off, let the dishes pile up. It was easier to sit in the quiet than to hear someone tell her to stay strong again. She didn't feel strong. She felt worn. Like a page that had been turned too many times, but no one ever really read. The world outside, however, had begun to stir. A journalist from the Charlotte Post left her a voicemail. Then another, and another. A friend from college messaged her a screenshot. "Is this you?" The post from the service workers group had been picked up by a local blogger, and then, somehow, it spread. Not because Camille shouted, but because other people started whispering her truth until the whisper became a wave. Yelp was flooded. Google reviews tanked. And somewhere had found a clip of the cafe owner, Blair Stanton, speaking at a 2022 entrepreneurship conference about inclusivity through design. The internet devoured it. Someone stitched together a TikTok, Blair talking about cultural innovation, while overlaying text that read, "This is the same place that fired a black woman for speaking to her grandmother in Yoruba." By the time Camille checked Twitter, she had 317 unread notifications. She closed the app. That night, Mommy called again. Her voice carried its usual stillness, like the ocean at 4 a.m. "Camila," she said gently, "I saw you. On the news." Camille sank into her couch. "I didn't want this, Mommy. I didn't ask for it." "I know, but the truth doesn't wait for permission." Camille stayed quiet for a long time. Then she said it. I'm tired of hiding. And she meant it. The next morning, she opened her laptop. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. No drafts, no edits, no slogans. Just her voice. She typed, "My name is Camille Brooks. I was fired from a café in Charlotte for speaking Yoruba to my grandmother on a short phone call during my shift. I wasn't unprofessional. I wasn't loud. I wasn't disruptive. I was just a granddaughter checking in. And for that, I was erased." If you've ever felt like you had to shrink to fit, like your voice wasn't welcome in the place you worked or studied or lived, I see you. You're not alone. Not anymore. She hit post, then shut her laptop. Made tea. Waited. 12 hours later, the tweet had 0 likes. By morning, it passed 100. In a college classroom in New Orleans, a professor printed Camille's tweet and taped it to the wall under the heading, "Language is Identity." In Portland, a woman named Maribel wrote, "I stopped speaking Spanish at work after a manager asked me to just stick to English in the break room." Camille's story helped me realize I don't have to apologize for being bilingual. A high schooler in Detroit played her tweet aloud in his social studies presentation on cultural erasure. The post was picked up by BuzzFeed, NBC Local, Blavity, and NPR's Code Switch, and then by someone Camille hadn't heard from in 10 years, Jordan Harper, her old high school friend who now hosted a podcast called The Human Thread. He messaged, "Camille, I'd love to give you the mic. On your terms, no agenda, just you." At first, she hesitated. The idea of hearing her own voice through speakers made her stomach twist. But then she remembered something Mommy used to say. If they try to silence your tongue, sing louder. Sing in the language they fear most your own. So she said yes. The podcast episode dropped on a Tuesday morning. Camille spoke with a voice steady and unforced. Not rehearsed, just real. She talked about identity, about growing up, learning to read labels on people's faces before she even read chapter books. She talked about code switching, about the exhaustion of living in translation, about how silence isn't always peace, sometimes it's survival. And then she said, "We're told to assimilate so we won't make people uncomfortable. But when you erase your language, your rhythm, your name, you don't become more accepted. You just become invisible." That line was clipped and reshared across platforms. By Friday, it had over 3 million views. Camille's inbox flooded again, this time not with pity but with stories. "Your words made me call my grandmother for the first time in months. I played this for my immigrant parents. We cried together. I started speaking Swahili at home again." Alana sent her a voice message. "Girl, you don't even know what you just did." Camille didn't feel like a leader. She just felt free, for the first time in years. But the moment that truly cracked her open came quietly. She was checking her email, deleting spam, when she saw a subject line that made her freeze. From J. Roth, Legal Counsel, Birch, Barley. The message was cold. "Camille, we are aware of the recent attention regarding your departure. We'd like to schedule a brief meeting to discuss potential resolution and ensure both sides are heard. Sincerely, J. Roth." She read it 3 times. It wasn't an apology. It was a cleanup crew. They didn't want peace. They wanted her silence. Camille stood up from her desk, pacing. She could ignore it, walk away. She could take the win and let the story be what it already was. But something inside her wouldn't rest. It was the same feeling she used to get as a child, when teachers mispronounced her name on purpose and laughed like it was harmless. It was the same burning when her landlord once asked if she spoke regular English at home. It wasn't rage. It was clear. They could handle her working quietly in the corner. But they didn't know what to do with her speaking fully, loudly, and without permission. She picked up her phone. "Hello, this is Camille Brooks. I got your email." "Yes, I'll meet." The next scene would play out in an office suite with glass walls and filtered water. But this wasn't a negotiation. This was a reckoning. And Camille wasn't walking in to get her job back. She was walking in to take her voice with her. She didn't raise her voice. She raised the standard. The office was sterile. Glass walls, polished concrete floors, a single plant in the corner that looked too perfect to be real. Camille Brooks sat in a gray upholstered chair across from two people who looked like they'd rehearsed this conversation 20 times before she walked in. Jay Roth, the legal counsel for Birch Barley, wore a charcoal suit and an expression as neutral as printer paper. Beside him sat Jordan Hayes, the general manager who had once handed Camille her schedule every week without ever really seeing her. Now, his eyes flicked up to meet hers, but only for a second. "Thank you for coming in, Camille," Roth began, hands folded. "We understand this has been a challenging few weeks." Camille didn't respond. She didn't nod. She didn't smile. She waited. "We've prepared a formal apology," Roth continued, sliding a printed page across the table. "We're also prepared to offer you 3 months of severance in exchange for resolution of this matter. Of course, we'd ask for a standard non-disclosure agreement, nothing unusual." Camille picked up the paper. She read the first line, then stopped, because it said, "We regret any misunderstandings that may have occurred regarding your recent departure." She folded it in half. "I'm not interested in your regrets," she said, her voice low but clear. "I'm here to make sure this doesn't happen to someone else." Jordan shifted in his seat. Roth cleared his throat. "Camille, I understand you're upset." "No," she said. "You understand I have a platform. You understand your café is bleeding reviews. What you don't understand is that this wasn't just about a job. It was about dignity." Roth blinked, slowly. Camille leaned in. "I wasn't late. I wasn't unprofessional. I didn't curse, or yell, or break a single policy. I spoke to my grandmother in Yoruba, the language she raised me in, the language of my grief, my joy, my faith, and you made me feel like that was a threat." Silence filled the room like water in a sinking boat. Camille turned to Jordan. "You could have stood up. You could have said, 'She's one of our best.' But you didn't. You smiled and let them cut me loose because someone with a platinum credit card got uncomfortable." Jordan looked down. Camille placed the folded apology back on the table. "Here's what I want," she said. "I want your apology, but I want it to be public. I want you to say it was wrong to fire someone for speaking their mother tongue. And I want no NDA." Roth's eyes widened. "Camille, that's not standard." "I'm not standard," she replied, "and I'm not afraid." Jordan finally spoke, voice thin. "We're under pressure, Camille. This whole thing is bigger than—" She cut him off. "It was always bigger than me. You just never saw it." Roth tapped his pen. 3 months severance and a private apology is a very reasonable. "I've been reasonable my entire life," Camille said. "That's how you get erased." Roth shifted again. And then, unexpectedly, Jordan exhaled. His shoulders slumped. He looked at her not like a manager, but like a man who had made a coward's choice and couldn't outrun the mirror anymore. "You didn't deserve it," he said quietly. Camille didn't say thank you, because that wasn't courage. That was a confession. "I'll sign nothing," she said, "but I'll wait 2 days. You want this to be over? Post the truth." She stood and walked out. The next afternoon, Birch Barley posted an official statement across their platforms. "We acknowledge that the dismissal of Camille Brooks was handled in a way that did not reflect our values of inclusion and respect. Speaking one's native language, especially to a loved one, should never be grounds for termination. We deeply apologize to Camille and the broader community. We are reviewing our internal practices moving forward." Some applauded. Some called it PR damage control. Some didn't care either way. But Camille? She wasn't waiting for anyone's applause. That same evening, she walked to the edge of Marshall Park, just a few blocks from the cafe she used to work at. The sun was slipping behind the skyline. The air smelled like warm pavement and pine. Alana was already there, sitting on a bench with a bag of takeout and 2 bottled teas. "You came," she said, smiling. Camille sat beside her. I needed to see something green, she replied. They ate in silence for a while. It was the good kind of silence assured, not forced. Then Alana said, So you torched the building? Camille smiled, soft. I didn't burn anything. I just opened the windows and let people see what was already on fire. A moment passed. Have you ever thought about going back? Alana asked. Camille shook her head. I'm not shrinking myself to fit into rooms that were never meant to hold me. They clinked tea bottles like toast. Camille looked out at the water. I always thought if I kept my head down, if I was kind, efficient, reliable, that it would be enough to stay safe. And now I know safety built on silence isn't safety. It's surrender. Later that night, Camille stood in front of her bathroom mirror. No makeup, no filter, just her and the face that had learned how to survive. She took a deep breath, picked up her phone, and clicked record. Not for a rant, not for a takedown, just a message. If you've ever been made to feel small because of the way you speak, because of your accent, your language, your name, I need you to hear this. You don't owe your silence to anyone. Not to keep your job. Not to keep the peace. Not to be palatable. Your voice exactly as it ices enough. Even when they flinch. Even when they whisper. Even when they walk away. She posted it, turned off the phone, and went to bed. For the first time in weeks, she slept without dreaming of being chased or erased. Because she had stopped asking for space. She had taken it. She didn't return to take her place back. She built a new place entirely. A month later, Camille walked past Birch Barley, without flinching. The windows gleamed. The sign was repainted. A chalkboard out front read, Now hiring? Bilingual? Even better. She smiled, not out of satisfaction, but because she didn't need it anymore. Inside, the tables were still the same polished wood. The espresso machine still hissed, and the music still hummed like nothing had happened. But everything had. Camille didn't go inside. She had somewhere else to be. On the other side of town, inside the community center off Beatty's Ford Road, the air smelled like ginger and steamed rice. Folding chairs formed a loose circle in a rec room that still had a broken vending machine in the corner. 12 people sat in that circle. Teenagers, retirees, a young mother holding a baby, a janitor who wore his work uniform with quiet pride. This was Camille's new café. Except no one served coffee here. They served something else. Voice. Her workshop, Mother Tongue, had started small. Just a flyer printed at FedEx. Just an idea. A space for Black and immigrant communities to reconnect with the languages they were told to leave behind. No tuition, no grades, no rules about speaking properly. Each week, she brought in someone new and elder to teach lullabies in Swahili, a chef who explained the rhythm of recipes in Haitian Creole, a college student who translated poetry from Amharic. The only requirement, come as you are, speak as you were born. One Saturday afternoon, a 10-year-old boy stood up and read a letter he wrote in Igbo. His father, sitting behind him, wept silently into his hands. Another day, a woman in her 50s brought in a cassette tape. It was the voice of her late grandmother, teaching her a Yoruba prayer she hadn't heard in decades. She played it. They all listened. Not because they understood the words, but because they understood the ache. And through it all, Camille sat quietly, taking notes. She didn't lead with a microphone. She led with presence. Her podcast, also called Mother Tongue, grew faster than she expected. It started with food. Scallion stew, jollof, akara. She would talk through recipes while telling stories of the women who cooked them. And then, she talked about erasure. About being corrected for saying plantain the wrong way. About the first time someone told her, Yoruba isn't useful here. About the last time she said her real name out loud and someone laughed. People wrote in, hundreds of them, from Memphis, from Montreal, from Mozambique. I stopped speaking Arabic at work. Your voice made me miss it. I didn't know there was a name for the ache I felt. You gave it one. I'm teaching my daughter Shona now. Thank you." Camille didn't feel famous. She felt heard. That was enough. Then one day, she received an invitation. The Charlotte Cultural Foundation wanted to honor her at their annual event. The theme, Living Legacies. They wanted to name a new room in the library's East Side branch after her podcast. Camille didn't answer right away. She read the email twice. Then she turned off the screen and sat in silence for 15 minutes. She thought of Mommy. On the way, she used to hum while slicing plantains. Of how she'd pat Camille's chest and say, "That's where your voice lives. Not in your throat, in your heart." Camille whispered, "I wish you were here," then smiled softly. She was. The day of the ceremony, the air was thick with Carolina summer. Camille wore a mustard-colored wrap dress and her real name pinned to her chest, Camila Oluwaseun Brooks. Alana stood beside her. Milo flew in from D.C. Even a few of Camille's former co-workers from the cafe came quietly, but visibly, as if to say, "We see you now." The new wing of the library was filled with families, students, elders. On the wall, a gold plaque read, "The Mother Tongue Room," in honor of those whose first language was never forgotten, only waiting to be spoken again. Camille didn't give a long speech. She just said, "When I was younger, I thought keeping quiet would keep me safe. But I've learned that silence doesn't protect us. It erases us. Today, I speak not to fight but to exist. And in that, there is power." There was no applause at first, just stillness. Then, one by one, they stood. And they clapped. Not loud, not explosive, but sustained. The kind of applause that comes not for performance, but for truth. That evening, Camille sat in her apartment with her window open. The night breeze floated in, carrying with it a hint of honeysuckle and faraway music. She called Mommy's old number. It disconnected, as always. But she left a voicemail anyway. "The library named a room after us, Mammy. I hope you'd like that. I hope you know I never stopped speaking. Even when they tried to make me small. Even when they asked for my silence, I remembered what you said. Truth has a long breath. You were right. It outlasted everything." She hung up. She sat there in the dark. And for the first time since that Thursday afternoon in the back of a cafe, she felt something new. Not triumph. Not revenge. Just this. Wholeness. Camille didn't return to food service. She didn't chase headlines. She didn't build a brand. She built a room, a space, a movement, and it bore her naminot on a banner, but in the quiet chorus of those who spoke again without shame. A woman in Milwaukee taught her son to say, "I love you" in Urdu. A man in Atlanta wrote poetry in Creole for the first time in 30 years. A grandmother in Houston stopped whispering her prayers at the dinner table. Camille didn't ask for any of it. But sometimes, the mic finds the voice that was never meant to stay quiet. And sometimes, the world finally listens. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply speak without shrinking, without translating who we are to make others more comfortable. Camille's story reminds us that dignity doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it just refuses to whisper. If this story moved you, share it. Leave a comment with your own voice, your own language, your own truth. And if you haven't yet, subscribe for more stories that honor resilience, identity, and the quiet courage to be fully yourself. She didn't fight to be seen. She spoke so others could stop hiding. Stay tuned.